if I told you that one of the most popular yet misunderstood characters in all of Naruto, in Kakashi, was actually at one point part of the Akatsuki? I'm aware, it sounds like a ridiculous fan fiction or a what if, but recent discoveries on my end have dug up enough information to make me believe that there is a solid possibility that at one point or another, Kakashi was on the Akatsuki. See, this is the weird part about my job. I spend hours every single day poring over every piece of Naruto content in existence. And because of this, when I stare at a manga panel or a frame from the anime for 3 hours when most people would have skipped directly past it, well, my neurons finally fire together and sometimes a new theory is born. And while some of those theories are admittedly a little out there, today I have what feels like rather substantial evidence. So buckle up and grab your tinfoil hats because today we're talking, was Kakashi on the Akatsuki? But before we get to theorizing about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like hearing me speculate about things that may or may not have happened, well then you're gonna love my other page, The Weeb Commander, where I talk theories from every other anime in existence. So the Akatsuki started as a goodwill organization trying to spread peace amongst a ninja world rife with war. Started by the Ame orphans, Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato, there was a time when the Akatsuki had significantly more members than the Akatsuki that we know and love. When the Akatsuki was more of an organization than a team. And the reason that it being an organization was important is because the Akatsuki were simply a team that would run odd jobs. While sometimes these odd jobs would be protection details or assassinations in order to garner money to build up the strength of the Akatsuki, it was truly a power through numbers situation. And while we don't know a huge amount about the Akatsuki during this time period, we know a fair amount. We know their mission, how they were trying to accomplish their mission, and we have a picture of the majority of their members. And this picture is actually where the meat of this theory is derived from. You see, the thing about being a largely benevolent organization is that you're not hard to infiltrate. As long as you put yourself in front of Yahiko with a relatively like-minded ideology to Yahiko, he'll probably let you into the organization. After all, Yahiko and Nagato and Konan could use all the help they could get. They knew they would need a lot of money in order to spread their peace as far as they could. And considering the fact that at the time, Hanzo the Salamander wasn't working collaboratively with them, they had no state-backed funding. And even more than that, they had no state-backed firepower. In essence, the Akatsuki were kind of working like a sovereign state in the Hidden Rain. They were an entity independent of the Hidden Rain's ideologies, hoping that once they had worked enough ninja jobs, since the majority of them were trained ninjas from the Hidden Rain, they would be able to use the power, money, and numbers accumulated by doing all of these ninja jobs and spreading their ideology to spread peace. But just because the Akatsuki during this time were a peaceful organization does not mean that villages didn't have an eye on them. More specifically, doesn't mean that Konoha didn't have an eye on them. See, Danzo had a very, and I mean very vested interest in the Akatsuki. See, Danzo and the rest of the Akatsuki were already pretty wary of the Hidden Rain. I mean, after all, the Hidden Rain had effectively beaten Konoha in the Second Great Shinobi World War. And while the three legendary Sannin lived to tell the story, a lot of people didn't. Hanzo the Salamander himself took out an entire platoon of Konoha shinobi, only leaving the legendary Sannin. And it was as the legendary Sannin retreated from the Hidden Rain with their heads held low that Jiraiya was propositioned by the Ame orphans to train them in ninjutsu. Now we know that Jiraiya only hung out in the Hidden Rain for about 3 years, after which he left and the Ame orphans founded the Akatsuki. But think about that for a second. Think about the politics going on in the world right now, especially when we consider the fact that at this point, Hiruzen was still Hokage, which meant Danzo had more power than he ever had, as Danzo was one of Hiruzen's key confidants and sat on the Konoha Council, meaning basically anything Hiruzen wanted to do, he had to run by Danzo. And while obviously Hiruzen has the final say on anything Konoha does, because the Hokage is kind of like a dictator, this was probably the moment when Danzo had the most influence. And Danzo is a spiteful man. See, we're well aware that the Second Great Shinobi World War was an embarrassment for Konoha, as even Nagato himself claims that Konoha were the aggressors in this war. And yet, even after aggressing a war against a much smaller nation, they turned back defeated. And the Second Great Shinobi World War coming to an armistice did not settle the tensions between the two nations. Even after the war ended, Danzo kept a very close eye on the Hidden Rain, basically being aware of every single one of their moves somehow. See, Danzo was almost preternaturally tapped into everything that was going on in the Hidden Rain. And as somebody who leads a subsection of the Anbu, this makes sense. I mean, the Root's entire job is assassinations and intel gathering. They're like the Anbu, except they only listen to Danzo. But just because Danzo is in charge of the root doesn't mean that he doesn't have dominion over the Anbu as well. Technically, the Anbu are loyal to Hiruzen. Since Hiruzen and Danzo made the majority of their decisions together, both the Anbu and the root were beholden to Danzo to some degree. And thus, any little birdie in any corner of the world in the form of the root or the Anbu would get back to Danzo in some regard. And this is how Danzo knew things, like the fact that after the Second Great Shinobi World War, Hanzo the Salamander found himself much more concerned with holding on to the last vestiges of power that he had. See, prior to the Second Great Shinobi World War and during the Second Great Shinobi World War, Hanzo was more focused on spreading peace amongst nations. Hanzo had seen the destruction brought to his village by larger villages and wanted to eradicate that from the world. However, after the conclusion of the Second Great Shinobi World War, Hanzo for some reason became sort of a recluse. He became obsessed with the power that he had, so much so that the obsession for holding on to the small amount of power he already had greatly outweighed his want for world peace. However, there was still a part of Hanzo that thirsted for world peace, and that was a problem for Konoha. See, world peace in a ninja world is usually only ever achieved through brute force. Peace isn't just shaking hands and accepting each other. Peace is taking over the entire world and having everybody be one nation. The reason that Hanzo wanting peace is a problem for Konoha is because so did the Akatsuki, and Danzo was incredibly privy to the goal of the Akatsuki. But if both Hanzo the Salamander and the Akatsuki want the same thing, and they're both incredibly powerful entities on their own, the latter quite literally being able to basically defeat Konoha's greatest warriors by himself, what would happen if these two great entities came together? And thus Danzo did his best impersonation of the American government and began to seed some dissent. He did this by bending the ear of Hanzo the Salamander, telling him about all the ways the Akatsuki wanted to seize his power, even though the Akatsuki wanted to work collaboratively with him. This worked perfectly because the Akatsuki and Hanzo had actually set up a time to talk about working together. But Danzo told Hanzo that this was all a ploy to assassinate him to take over the Hidden Rain, and thus Hanzo and Danzo decided to work together to destroy the Akatsuki. At least, that's what they thought would happen. You see, the plan by Hanzo and Danzo is relatively simple. Kidnap Konan and use her as bait for Yahiko and Nagato. Then have the relatively weak-willed Nagato kill Yahiko, the head of the Akatsuki, and once you cut off the head of the snake, the body will die. That was the plan, at least. But we gotta ask ourselves the question, how did Danzo know enough of this information to manipulate the situation so perfectly? It's clear that he must have had a mole or an informant either in the Akatsuki or in the Hidden Rain. Otherwise, how would he have known the goal of the Akatsuki? How would he have known that their goals aligned with those of Hanzo? How would he have known who the head of the Akatsuki was? How would he have known where to kidnap Konan from? And for that matter, how would he have kidnapped Konan? See, well, obviously Danzo brings a ton of Konoha Anbu to this meetup to kill Yahiko. It's never explicitly stated that he uses those Anbu forces to kidnap Konan. See, as we understand Konan's kidnapping, it's while she's out surveying the 7th ward of the Hidden Rain village. While she's out surveying the 7th ward, that's when Hanzo and Yahiko come to their conclusion to meet and talk about peaceful resolutions. However, the timing of this seems just too perfect. How did Danzo and Hanzo know that there was nobody important out there with Konan? How do they know to perfectly align their meeting with the time that Konan would be out patrolling? All of it to me screams a mole within this early version of the Akatsuki. And like I stated earlier, because this early version of the Akatsuki was so large, it wouldn't be hard to have one in there. In comes Kakashi. Now I know what you're saying, you're yelling at the screen.
Nick, Kakashi and the Anbu in this timeline doesn't make any sense.
Because after all, we know for a fact that Kakashi doesn't join the Anbu until after Rin and Obito have both died. And we know that after both Rin and Obito's death, Kakashi is assigned to the Anbu by Minato, who at this point is the Hokage. And we know that Minato doesn't become the Hokage until after the Third Great Shinobi World War, because Hiruzen steps down as the third Hokage in order to end the Third Great Shinobi World War. Hiruzen does this because people like Danzo are calling for the continuation of the Third Great Shinobi World War because they have the other villages on the ropes. And people like Danzo and other radicals within Konoha believe that this is Konoha's one opportunity to take over the rest of the world. And thus pulling out of the war right now would not only be a waste of all the lives lost during the Third Great Shinobi World War, but just a really bad idea in general. So Hiruzen decided to step down as the third Hokage to take the blame of that bad idea in the wasted lives onto himself. And then Minato was elected as the fourth Hokage, and the first thing that he did upon seeing that one of his former students in Kakashi was being cast into the shadows by the death of Rin and Obito, decided to tell Kakashi to join the Anbu, believing a change in pace would be good for for his mental health, and that possibly the darkness that's growing inside of him could be harnessed into a weapon. Not his best idea to see a struggling child and just be like,
Oh yeah, go to the place that's really good with struggling children. The Ambu/Root.
May not fix your mentality, but oh buddy, will you learn how to kill. Guess you could say Minato is also doing his best impersonation of the American government. So Nick, if the timeline's all woogity, how does this theory have any legs whatsoever? Well, it is stated that Hanzo's confrontation against Yahiko does take place during the Third Great Shinobi World War. Think about why Hanzo and Yahiko and Nagato and Konan would believe that the Third Great Shinobi World War was still occurring at this time. The Hidden Rain, for all intents and purposes, as far as we know, was not actively participating in the Third Great Shinobi World War. It, like the First Great Shinobi World War, was simply a battle between the big nations. Think about it, if the Hidden Rain was actively participating in this war like they did in the Second Great Shinobi World War, why would Hanzo listen to Danzo? You could say that Hanzo was deluded by his need for power and was willing to take any ally possible, but let's use the Occam's razor explanation here. The simplest answer is usually the correct one. Konoha and all of the other villages who had launched attacks into the Hidden Rain and lost at the hands of Hanzo the Salamander in the Second Great Shinobi World War really wouldn't want to do that again, now would they? Especially when you consider the fact that owning the Hidden Rain has no tactical or monetary benefits. The Third Great Shinobi World War was basically every other large hidden country launching an attack against Konoha. The Hidden Mist, the Hidden Cloud, and the Hidden Stone are all confirmed to have been in combat against Konoha in the Third Great Shinobi World War, but never the Hidden Rain, meaning that this war hadn't stampeded its way through the Hidden Rain once again. And thus the continuation of a war is really just hearsay to those who are living in the Hidden Rain. And you know who was in the Hidden Rain, basically acting as a news outlet to the outside world for both Hanzo and the Akatsuki to some degree? Danzo, the person who was fully willing to act outside of the jurisdiction of the Hokage and was trying to keep the Third Great Shinobi World War moving. It's an extremely likely thought that Danzo would continue meddling in other countries after the conclusion of the Third Great Shinobi World War to restart it or keep it going, as after all, that's exactly what he wanted to do. And nothing would restart the war faster than the Hidden Rain, a village with an unprecedented amount of power that had not only managed to defeat Konoha, but also possibly the Hidden Sand and the Land of Iron, either becoming incredibly destabilized or finding a partnership with Konoha. And thus Danzo, working somewhat as the news outlet, conferring the information of the outside war to the Hidden Rain, confirmed the idea that it was still going on to make sure that his meddling would go relatively unnoticed. As after all, what happens in a war stays in the war. On top of this, a timeline within Naruto is also a bit woogity. See, it's stated that Yahiko died at 15, which when you consider that Jiraiya found them when they were about 7 years old and trained them till they were about 10, only gives Yahiko about 5 years of life. There's a problem with this though, because when Jiraiya returns to Konoha, Minato is 14, which would make Minato 19 when Yahiko dies. The problem with this is that we know Minato dies at 24, and that his reign as Hokage was considered incredibly short, said to be around 1 to 2 years, meaning that Minato became Hokage around 22 to 21 most likely. But Yahiko's death happened at the end of the Third Great Shinobi World War. We know this because Obito had been operating under Madara's control for a while. Obito had already been completely brainwashed. Rin was dead. Obito had already approached the Akatsuki about them joining him. This is why after Yahiko's death, Nagato goes to join Obito. Everything in the Naruto timeline prior to this points to Yahiko's death probably being the last thing that happens in the Third Great Shinobi World War. But because Yahiko's death is most likely one of the last things that happens in the Third Great Shinobi World War, that gives us a 1 to 2 year age gap for Minato becoming Hokage, which tells us that there's a possibility that the Third Great Shinobi World War was actually continued past the signing of the armistice in the Hidden Rain, specifically by Danzo. And then after the armistice was signed to close the Third Great Shinobi World War, and Hiruzen took a step down and Minato took a step up, Kakashi was placed into the Anbu. But Kakashi actually isn't only an Anbu member. In fact, Kakashi spent a numerous amount of years in the Root, being directly under the thumb of Danzo. And it took Kakashi years to see that the ways of the Root did not agree with his principles. However, in those years that he served in the Anbu/Root, he was a ruthless killer. Like the one time he was sent to protect an envoy that was making an agreement with the Land of Trees to find peace. But when the Land of Trees launched a surprise attack against the envoy from Konoha, Kakashi slaughtered every single one of them, both the surprise attackers and the diplomats sent by the Land of Trees. Kakashi's bloodlust was so palpable and so full that even Itachi reveled at it. So who's to say Kakashi, newly instated to the Anbu and technically the Root's first mission wasn't to the Hidden Rain? See, Danzo has an incredible talent at finding talented children who have borderline sociopathic tendencies. And at this current time, that was Kakashi. And thus Danzo, identifying this genius and sociopathic streak in Kakashi, decided to make him a mole in this new benevolent Akatsuki that were about to form a relationship with Hanzo. But how would Kakashi join the Akatsuki? Well, numerous events in Naruto have shown us that Kakashi is kind of a master of disguise, as multiple times throughout the show, Kakashi has donned disguises to walk around Konoha without his mask or his headband. See, Kakashi has a disguise, the disguise of a photographer who goes around Konoha and asks people questions that he, as Kakashi, wouldn't be able to ask and get honest answers to. This photographer has long moppy brown hair, green eyes, and 2 purple markings on his face that seem somewhat normal within the confines of Naruto, but we understand are to cover his scar. And even though markings on the face are relatively commonplace within Naruto, we never really see these purple markings anywhere else. That is, except for on 2 separate members of the Akatsuki. There's a scene in the anime and the manga when the early version of the Akatsuki kind of take a photo together. And in this photo, there's anywhere between 2 and 4 very suspicious people. Behind Yahiko over his left shoulder, there is a young person, roughly about Yahiko's age, with moppy brown hair in purple markings on his face. These markings are almost identical to those used by Kakashi when he's in his photographer disguise. Not to mention the hairstyle between Kakashi's photographer disguise and this character are almost identical. They both have long hair down the sides of their head and a bang that comes between their eyes. And while the hair color of the character in the Akatsuki is admittedly lighter than that of Kakashi in his photographer outfit, think of the distance in time between these 2 characters' existence. But even if you believe that character may not be Kakashi, there's another, possibly even better case. There's a man behind Konan over her right shoulder. Now, this man's hairstyle is completely different from that of photographer Kakashi. However, this man, just like the man we had previously talked about, also has a purple marking. But that's not the most suspicious thing about this man. See, in all the flashbacks of the early Akatsuki, this man can be seen. He has long hair that comes down in 2 bangs around his face in a bun. However, in this picture, he's a bit suspicious, because in this picture, not only does he have the purple marking that only Kakashi's photographer mode has, also his left eye is bandaged. This is the only circumstance where we have seen this character have a bandage over his left eye. In all of the other instances of the flashbacks, this character has both eyes. And while you could say,
Nick, this is just an injury he got in combat,
is it not a distinct possibility that Kakashi could have possibly assassinated this character on one of his first missions for the Anbu or the Root, taken him as a disguise and covered his eye under the guise of not revealing who he actually is, because obviously he can't turn off his Sharingan. Now we know color contacts exist within the Naruto universe. Kakashi uses them to make his eyes green. So with the use of a color contact over his Sharingan, Kakashi would have been safe from anybody figuring out his Sharingan was indeed a Sharingan. But having it uncovered is incredibly chakra depletive for Kakashi, and thus both of these characters are incredibly shady. But what's even weirder are the characters on the left and right side of the bandage-eyed character, because the character to the left of the bandage-eyed character is an Inuzuka. You see, Inuzuka's facial markings are actually a reference to Princess Mononoke. Kishimoto is a huge fan of Hayao Miyazaki's works, and thus, since the Inuzukas work with wolves, all of the Inuzukas have red fangs on their face like Princess Mononoke. The Inuzukas are from Konoha. There is no other section of them outside of Konoha. So why is there an Inuzuka on the earliest version of the Akatsuki? For that matter, the dude to the right of the bandage eye guy has whiskers, something we've only ever seen from 3 people, and all of them are progeny of Kushina. But the theory as to why Naruto, Boruto, and Himawari have whiskers is because their mother was the Jinchuriki of Kurama while pregnant with them. There is another female Jinchuriki who has been pregnant while being the Jinchuriki of Kurama in Mito Uzumaki, who very much has children. So within this theory, there's another theory. So what have we established here? That Danzo is somebody who is trying to extend the Third Great Shinobi World War, extended it within the confines of the Hidden Rain Village, and that Danzo had way too much information about what was going on with the Akatsuki and Hanzo to not have a mole. We have two people with distinct facial markings that only hail from Konoha, and two people that could very easily be Kakashi in disguise. And thus the possible way that Danzo was getting all this information about both Hanzo and the Akatsuki were a newly joined up Kakashi. See, because we know next to nothing about these early years of Kakashi in the Akatsuki. It's kind of just talked about as Kakashi's darkest period, a time when he was used as a weapon to slaughter any enemy of the Leaf. And thus Kakashi and possibly other spies from Konoha were placed inside the earliest version of the Akatsuki to keep an eye on things and spread dissent, where they with their information were able to make it possible so Danzo would have Konan in the perfect place to be kidnapped when he needed her to be. Otherwise, genuinely make Konan being separate from the rest of the Akatsuki when Hanzo and the Akatsuki met to talk about setting up times to talk peace and working together makes sense. It's too perfect. It's too convenient. And the wildest part about this theory is this might be why Kakashi was assigned to Team 7. See, because after Yahiko's death, it's not like the rest of the Akatsuki members all died. Some of them left the Akatsuki and some went with Nagato. And while none of these characters lived to tell the story or stayed with the Akatsuki long enough to make it to the final cut of the Akatsuki, it's possible that any of the spies placed in this earliest version of the Akatsuki could have gone with Nagato to keep an eye on what this newest version of Akatsuki would be. And upon determining the plan of the Akatsuki, Kakashi returned to the Leaf, possibly under the guise of no longer agreeing with the ideologies of the Akatsuki. And this is why Kakashi was assigned to Team 7. As being the Jonin leader of Team 7, Kakashi was as close as possible to the village's key asset, at least as far as the Akatsuki was concerned. Kakashi, informed about the ideologies and wants of the Akatsuki, knew to protect Naruto, until of course the passing of the third Hokage. As obviously with the passing of the third Hokage to the fifth Hokage in Tsunade, the person in charge of Anbu and all Anbu related tactics changed hands. And Tsunade is the first person to not be tapped into the politics of the Third Great Shinobi World War, and thus she would be entirely separated from any spy work done on the Akatsuki, which is why at that point Kakashi would hand over Naruto to the protection of Jiraiya. But who knows, maybe I just saw some recycled character designs in the back of a photo of the old Akatsuki and decided, oh, that looks a lot like Kakashi's photographer mode. And maybe I just know enough about Naruto that I can make any theory sound plausible. What do you guys think? Tell me in the comments below, and while you're down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. But for real, find one other person in the entire show with just the standard purple straight lines down their face, and I will tell you, this entire theory is bupkis.